Veronika Yurievna, 72 years old, left her law office with a heavy heart and a folder of documents in her hands. Her recent years had seemed like a long, winding path, dotted with glimpses of happy moments and the fresh scars of loss. A widow for 10 years, she had become accustomed to the solitude of her small but cozy apartment on the outskirts of Moscow, where every object seemed to echo the voice of her late husband, Ivan. Ivan, an engineer by profession, was a thorough, fair man who always put family first. After his death, caused by a sudden heart attack, Veronika Yurievna was left alone, save for her daughter Maria and her family. Maria, her only child, was born late, when her mother, Anna Petrovna, was already in her 40s. Her daughter grew up to be a stately, goal-oriented woman. She tied her fate to Sergei, a successful executive at an IT company, and gave him a son, Vanya, now a 5-year-old rascal named after his grandfather. For Veronika Yurievna, her grandson was a true light in the window, a little ray of sunshine dispelling the dullness of everyday life. However, her relationship with her daughter and son-in-law was complicated. Maria called frequently, complaining about the relentless struggle with work and household chores, sometimes asking for help with Vanya, sometimes for a small sum for urgent needs. Sergei was polite but distant, his smile never reaching his eyes. Veronika Yurievna felt she was seen less as a mother and grandmother than as a resource, a source of support, both financial and emotional. Lately, thoughts of the impending inheritance distribution had been haunting her day and night. They invaded her consciousness early in the morning when she opened her eyes and stared at the white ceiling of her bedroom, and late in the evening when she sat in an old armchair, knitting in front of the flickering television. The apartment on the 4th floor of a 9-story panel building, the modest savings accumulated over a decade of marriage with Ivan, the small garden plot in the Moscow region with its sagging fence and old apple trees, all of this was more than just property. It represented years, sleepless nights at her sick husband's bedside, holidays and new dresses forgone to create a safety net. And now Veronika Yurievna increasingly wondered, to whom should all this go? She dreamed of leaving behind something bright for Vanya, for her bright-eyed, lively grandson who could hug her so tenderly that she couldn't breathe. She wanted Maria and Sergei to be able to give the boy what they themselves hadn't received in their youth: a separate room, a decent education, summer trips to the sea. Family is the most important thing, she repeated to herself, like an incantation, like a prayer. If not to save for children and grandchildren, then for whom? This thought calmed her, giving meaning to the long, lonely evenings. But somewhere deep inside, where the most honest and most painful feelings lurked, an anxiety nested, thin as a spider's web, yet tenacious. Maria didn't change all at once, not overnight, but gradually, year after year, like water wearing away a stone. After her marriage, a new, unfamiliar trait emerged in her, a calculating, cool, almost business-like quality. She began talking about money frequently, not openly complaining, but casually, as if it were a given. "Mom, just think about it. The rent is going up every year. Mom, Vanya's starting school soon, and good tutors cost a fortune. Mom, we're still young. We'd love to have our own apartment." And each time, subtle, almost imperceptible hints slipped into these conversations. Isn't it time to think about the future? Wouldn't it be better to arrange everything in advance, while Mom is of sound mind and sound mind? Sergei never spoke directly. He simply smiled his even, polite smile and nodded. "Yes, Mom, it's hard for young people these days. That's right, Veronika Yurievna. We need to help the young people." And then he'd add a joke, as if casually, "Once we get an inheritance for the young couple, we'll start living like normal people." And he'd laugh, expecting Veronika Yurievna to laugh too. She laughed out of politeness and habit, not wanting to spoil the relationship, but each such chuckle left a sharp sting in her soul. Today she'd finally made up her mind. She'd been gathering her courage for a long time, canceling her appointment with the lawyer several times, shuffling a folder of documents from one place to another. But in the morning, waking up with a heavy head and the feeling that she couldn't put it off any longer, she put on her best dark blue coat, wrapped a warm scarf around her neck, and headed to the law office. The lawyer turned out to be young, about 35, wearing a dark gray suit and a white shirt. He spoke calmly and clearly. A will can be made open or closed. We can specify the shares. We can allocate a mandatory share for a minor grandson. We can appoint an executor of the will. Everything is entirely feasible. Everything is legal. Veronika Yuryevna sat opposite her, her hands folded in her lap, nodding. But something inside her was gnawing, like an old splinter that just wouldn't come out. What if they aren't who they seem? A clear and terrible thought suddenly occurred to her. It was so unexpected that Veronika Yuryevna even shuddered. She immediately brushed it aside like a pesky fly. Nonsense, fabrications, the suspiciousness of old age. Maria, her daughter, her darling, her little girl, whom she carried in her womb, nursed, rocked, treated for all her childhood ailments. It can't be that she's up to something bad. Having signed the preliminary form and received copies, Veronika Yuryevna went outside. The February wind immediately hit her face, sharp, biting, and dusted with snow. The snow crunched pitifully underfoot, as if complaining about the cold. The street was alive with its own life. People were bundled up in scarves and hoods, hurrying about their errands. Cars honked, hot pies were being sold nearby, and the surprisingly delicious homemade smell of freshly baked goods wafted through the chilly air. And then, descending the steps, Veronika Yuryevna slipped on the icy tiles. A folder of papers fell out of her loosely closed bag and scattered across the sidewalk. "Oh, my God," she muttered, trying to bend over, but her back ached treacherously. And at that moment a small figure emerged from the crowd, as if from underground. A girl, no more than 10 years old. Dark curly hair escaped from under a tied-up cap. A bright multicolored skirt peeked out from under a tattered winter jacket. Dark skin, quick black eyes. A gypsy, Veronika Yuryevna immediately thought. The girl moved deftly, confidently, squatted down, gathered up the scattered sheets of paper, not letting the wind blow a single one away, neatly folded them, and handed them to the old woman. "Thank you, dear," Veronika Yuryevna smiled, taking the documents. "You're so quick." The girl looked up at her with large black eyes, a mysterious, almost adult glimmer in them. She glanced around as if checking to see if anyone was eavesdropping, and quietly, almost in a whisper, said, "Don't make a will in the name of your daughter and son-in-law. Go to them when they're out and look in the bedroom closet." Veronika Yuryevna froze. The words sounded so strange, so out of place coming from a child. She stared at the girl, trying to figure out if this was a joke or nonsense. What nonsense, she thought, but out loud she only laughed nervously and loudly. "Oh, honey, you've probably been watching too many movies, or your mom taught you that kind of joke. Don't talk nonsense. Go home. It's cold." The girl didn't smile. She simply nodded and stepped back, disappearing into the crowd as suddenly as she had appeared. Veronika Yuryevna shook her head, still chuckling. "Gypsies and their predictions. They're always making things up just to ask for money. Good thing I didn't pester you." She carefully folded the papers into her bag and walked to the bus stop. Along the way, she recalled the girl's words, but they seemed absurd. The closet in the bedroom. What could be in there? Maria's old things or Vanya's toys? Nonsense. At home, in her warm kitchen, Veronika Yuryevna made tea and sat by the window. It was getting dark outside, and the snow swirled in the streetlights. She thought about Maria. Her daughter had called yesterday, asking her to watch Vanya on Saturday because she and Sergei were going to a company party. "Of course I'll come," she'd replied. "My grandson, my joy." Now, recalling the gypsy woman's words, she smiled again. "Don't pay attention to such nonsense. Life is hard enough as it is. But somewhere deep inside, a vague unease stirred, like a slight draft in a closed room. The evening passed in the usual chores: dinner, TV, a call from Maria. Her daughter was chatty as always, but with a hint of impatience. "Mom, will you come on Saturday? Sergey and I really need to go." Veronika Yuryevna assured her that she would and wished her good night. Lying in bed, she tried to sleep, but her thoughts revolved around the will. "Maybe I should put it off. Think about it some more," she whispered to herself. But sleep came, sweeping away her doubts. The next day, life went on as usual. Veronika Yuryevna went to the store, met a neighbor, and chatted about the weather. The gypsy woman's words seemed like a distant dream. "Nonsense," she repeated. "I know my daughter. She's a good girl. She just hasn't had an easy life." But Saturday was approaching, and with it the possibility of being alone in Maria and Sergey's apartment. Veronika Yuryevna pushed the thought of the closet away, but it stubbornly returned, like a pesky fly. By Friday evening she decided, "No, I won't poke around in other people's things. It's not my business." And yet, as she packed a bag of gifts for Vanya, she felt a slight tremor. Life, she thought, is full of surprises. Who knows, maybe one of them is waiting in an ordinary closet. Saturday arrived. The day was gray and chilly, like most February days this year. Veronika Yuryevna woke early, out of old habit dating back to the days when Ivan left for work at 6 in the morning. She stood by the window for a long time, watching the drops of melted snow slowly creep down the glass. A strange premonition sat in her chest, not fear, not anxiety, but a premonition, as if someone invisible had gently tugged a string tied to her heart. She picked up a bag of gifts for her grandson, Vanya's favorite cars, the construction set he called the most important, a bag of homemade cookies, the knitted socks she knitted last week. Before leaving, she went to the mirror in the hallway. She looked at herself carefully, almost sternly. Her gray hair was neatly pulled back into a low bun. The wrinkles around her eyes had deepened, but her eyes were still the same, gray-green, attentive. "I'm getting old," she thought, "and yet I still run around like a little girl when they call me to babysit Vanya." She took the metro, then 3 more bus stops. Maria and Sergey's building smelled of dampness. Veronika Yuryevna climbed up to the 4th floor without an elevator, even though her knees had been begging for mercy for a while now. Maria opened the door, wearing makeup and a nice coat, but with tired shadows under her eyes. "Mom, you're just in time. We're already late. Vanya has had breakfast and is watching cartoons now. We'll be back around 10 o'clock, maybe a little later." "It's a work party, you know." She gave her mother a quick kiss on the cheek without even removing her gloves. Sergey emerged from the hallway holding the car keys, smiling his usual slightly strained smile. "Thank you, Veronika Yuryevna. You're our savior, as always. We have everything in the fridge. If anything happens, call." They left quickly, almost running, leaving behind the scent of expensive perfume. Veronika Yuryevna took off her shoes and hung up her coat. The familiar sounds of a cartoon about rescue puppies drifted from the room. She entered, and Vanya immediately rushed to her, hugging her legs. "Wow, you're here. Look, they're going to put out the fire with water pistols." She stroked the top of his head, inhaling the scent of baby shampoo and warm milk. This was her anchor, her meaning. Everything else could wait. The morning passed peacefully. They made monsters out of Play-Doh, read a book about a dragon afraid of the dark, ate cookies, and drank tea with raspberry jam. Vanya was happy, and Veronika Yuryevna tried not to think about what the girl had said outside, but the words kept coming back like a persistent refrain. "Look in the closet in the bedroom." After lunch, Vanya grew tired and asked to sleep. Veronika Yuryevna laid him down on the sofa in the living room, covered him with a blanket with cars on it, and turned on some soft music. He fell asleep almost instantly, snoring and hugging a stuffed raccoon. The apartment became very quiet. Veronika Yurievna stood in the hallway, listening to her grandson's breathing. Then she slowly walked through the apartment. The living room, the kitchen, the nursery, everything was as usual. Nothing special, nothing that could justify the girl's strange words. She stopped in front of the bedroom door. "This is stupid," she whispered to herself. "This is just stupid. I'm not going to go through other people's things. I'm not that kind of person." But her feet took a step forward of their own accord. Then another. The door was slightly open. Veronika Yurievna pushed it carefully, as if afraid it would creak too loudly. The room smelled of Maria's perfume. The air was slightly stuffy. The window hadn't been opened in a long time. A large bed, neatly made, bedside tables, a mirrored wardrobe that took up the entire wall. She walked closer. Her heart was pounding so hard it echoed in her ears. Her fingers trembled as she grabbed the handle of one of the doors. "I'll just take a look," she promised herself, "and then I'll close it and forget about it." The door slid aside with a soft rustle. At first she saw only clothes, Maria's dresses, Sergei's suits, a few boxes of shoes. Everything hung neatly, like in a store. Veronika Yurievna was about to close the door, but her gaze caught on the bottom shelf. There, behind a stack of sweaters, sat a cardboard shoebox, old, worn, with peeling paint. A photograph was taped to it. Veronika Yurievna recognized it immediately. She, Ivan, and little Maria at the dacha some 30 years ago. Veronika Yurievna squatted down, her knees creaking, and pulled the box toward her. Inside were documents, a birth certificate, passports, old bank statements, and fresh papers. Very fresh. A deed of sale for Veronika Yurievna's apartment, signed by herself. Only the signature wasn't hers. It looked like it, but it wasn't hers. Someone had worked very hard. Next came a power of attorney for all her accounts, also with a forged signature. And another document, a petition to the court to declare her incompetent, already prepared, with a date for next week. Doctors' signatures, one of whom Veronika Yurievna recognized. It was the local therapist whom she had seen only twice in the last 3 years, and Maria's signature as the applicant. Veronika Yurievna sank to the floor, holding the papers in her hands, unable to breathe. Everything she considered family turned out to be a sham. They hadn't waited for her death. They were planning to take her life first, legally, quietly. The apartment, the dacha, the money, everything she and Ivan had saved for decades, everything she wanted to leave to Vanya. And Vanya was just a tool, her weak spot, her love. She heard her grandson stir in the living room and, frightened, slammed the box shut, put it back, and slid the closet door shut. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely manage it. Then she stood up and leaned her forehead against the cold mirror. The reflection showed an unfamiliar old woman, her face as white as paper. She tiptoed out of the bedroom as if afraid to wake not a sleeping child, but her own former life. In the living room, Vanya was still asleep, his mouth slightly open, hugging the raccoon. Veronika Yurievna knelt down next to the sofa, looked at him for a long moment, then very gently kissed his temple. Tears dripped onto the blanket, but she didn't wipe them away. She sat there until Vanya woke up. When Maria and Sergei returned, Veronika Yurievna was her old self, smiling, joking, and telling her how wonderfully they'd spent the day. Her voice was slightly hoarse, though, and her eyes seemed to belong to another world. "Thank you, Mom," Maria said, kissing her goodbye. "You're our gold." Veronika Yurievna nodded. "Yes," she replied quietly, "gold." And she walked to the elevator, feeling something inside her finally and irrevocably break. Veronika Yurievna returned home late that evening. The elevator stopped on her floor with its familiar clank, but today the sound seemed foreign to her, as if she were in the entryway of a completely different building. The key turned in the lock with difficulty, or perhaps her hand was shaking. The door opened, and she was greeted by the familiar scent of lavender from the sachet in the cupboard and the sour milk she'd forgotten to put in the fridge that morning. She didn't turn on the hallway light. She walked into the dimly lit kitchen and put the kettle on. But she didn't brew any tea. She simply sat at the table, her hands palms down, as if she wanted to hold her own body together. She could still see the cardboard box, the forged signature, the declaration of incapacity, the dates. Everything had been planned with terrifying precision. They were in no hurry. They were waiting for the right moment, perhaps until she signed the will herself. Then the process would be even simpler and cleaner. And if she were stubborn, well, incapacity was more certain than death. After that, she could arrange guardianship, sell the apartment in the interests of the ward, and withdraw the money. Everything was legal. Everything was beautiful. Veronika Yurievna looked at her hands. Once these hands had kneaded pie dough, stroked little Masha's head, supported Ivan when he began having heart problems. Now they seemed alien, dry, and unnecessary. She didn't cry. The tears had run out back in her daughter's apartment as she sat on the floor next to sleeping Vanya and realized that even this love, her last true love, had been used as leverage. She barely slept that night. She lay there, staring at the ceiling, and sorted through her memories like old photographs in an album. Here was Masha in first grade with 2 braids and a huge bow. Here was Masha at her graduation, beautiful and radiant, already looking at the world with a hint of mockery. Here was Masha at her wedding, Sergei by her side. Both were smiling for the camera, but Veronika Yurievna could see now. Her daughter's smile was slightly strained, as if she were already counting the minutes until she could stop pretending. Toward morning, she got up, went to the sideboard, and pulled out an old tin cookie box. Her documents lay there. Her marriage certificate with Ivan, Maria's birth certificate, old savings books, Ivan's will, leaving everything to her. And after her death, to her daughter, and another will of her own. It contained 3 lines: the apartment, the dacha, and all of Maria's money. Veronika Yurievna stared at the piece of paper for a long time, then carefully tore it into tiny pieces. Instead of throwing them in the trash, she burned each piece one by one over the sink. The ashes fell onto the stainless steel and immediately cooled. She didn't yet know what she would do, but she knew the old will no longer existed. The day passed in a strange daze. She went shopping, bought groceries she hadn't eaten in a long time, fresh cottage cheese, sour cream, walnuts, and honey. The best kind, 900 rubles a kilo. She made serniki, the very ones Vanya loved so much. She ate one without relish. She put the rest in a container and put it in the refrigerator. That evening, Maria called. "Mom, hi. Vanya keeps asking about Grandma's serniki. We can come by tomorrow, around 6 o'clock. Veronika Yurievna listened to her own voice. It sounded calm, almost gentle. "Of course, come. I just baked some." She hung up and stood for a long time, staring at the phone. The next day, the 3 of them came, Maria, Sergei, and Vanya. Her grandson ran in first and rushed to hug her. Veronika Yurievna hugged him tighter than usual, inhaling the scent of his baby hair. For a second, she thought she could forgive everything for him. But then she looked at her daughter. Maria was wearing an expensive new coat. Sergei brought a bottle of wine. "Let's celebrate that everything is fine." They sat at the table, ate cheesecakes, drank tea, talked about trifles, about kindergarten, about work, about how spring was coming. Veronika Yurievna listened and smiled, but a new, cool, and clear feeling was growing inside her. She was no longer angry. The anger burned out overnight. All that remained was a sober, almost mathematical clarity. As they were getting ready, she suddenly said, "Masha, Seryozha, I've been thinking about the will." They both froze. Maria even put down her spoon very carefully. "I've decided not to formalize anything for now." Veronika Yuryevna continued in an even voice. "Let everything be done according to the law. After my death, everything is yours, but I won't rush." Sergei cleared his throat. Maria smiled quickly. "Well, of course, Mom, as you wish. We're not pressuring you." "No, don't press," Veronika Yuryevna agreed, looking her daughter straight in the eyes. "You are very patient." Maria looked away first. As they were getting dressed in the hallway, Vanya kissed his grandmother on the cheek and whispered, "You are the best grandmother in the world." Veronika Yuryevna smiled at him genuinely for the first time in days. "And you're the best grandson," she replied. And almost under her breath, she added, "The only one." The door closed silently. Veronika Yuryevna stood in complete silence for a moment, then went to the window and opened it. A stream of cool air blew into the room, bringing with it a freshness and the subtle aroma of distant smoke from someone's campfire. She took a deep breath. The feeling of fear was still present, but it no longer carried the same helplessness. Something else had emerged, a feeling that for the first time in many years she had regained control of her own life, was deciding for herself how to live her life. She closed the window, turned toward the room, and for the first time in a long time felt like this space belonged to her. Not to her memories, not to her daughter, but to herself. Spring passed, followed by summer. Veronika Yuryevna barely remembered that Saturday in February, but she lived through its aftermath every day, like a new habit, unconscious to others, but palpable to herself. She stopped rushing to answer Maria's calls. If the phone rang too often, she simply muted it and turned it face down. Sometimes she would call back a day or two later, calmly, without apology, citing being busy. "Masha, is something wrong?" she would ask. At first, her daughter was offended, but then she got used to it. Sergei began to behave more politely than before. He greeted her first and inquired about her well-being. Veronika Yuryevna responded briefly and kindly, but without the same willingness to drop everything and immediately come to her aid. She continued to see Vanya, but now their meetings took place only on her own turf. She invited him over for weekends, baked pies, took him to the park, and taught him to ride a bike in the courtyard. When Maria tried to bring her son for just an hour, citing urgent matters, Veronika Yuryevna gently refused. "No, dear, let him come for the whole day or even spend the night. Half an hour isn't enough time." Maria was angry, but she didn't dare argue. Something subtly changed in her mother's voice. A calm but firm no appeared, something that had never been there before. That summer, Veronika Yuryevna, for the first time in many years, went to her dacha not just for the weekend, but for the entire warm season. She took Ivan's old notebook with her planting plans and set about tidying up the plot. She pulled out perennial weeds, dug the beds, and planted tomatoes, cucumbers, zucchini, and dill. Her hands, accustomed to knitting needles and dough, were once again mastering the spade and hoe. The skin on her palms was rough, her back ached in the evenings, but this pain was different, honest, real. Nina Vasilyevna and Grigory Semyonovich, an elderly thin couple, lived next door, but surprisingly vigorous for their age. Previously, Veronika Yuryevna had limited herself to a nod over the fence and a short, "Good afternoon." Now everything had changed. One evening, Nina Vasilyevna brought a plate of hot raspberry pie. "You're sitting here alone, Veronique. At least have something sweet," she said. Veronika Yuryevna invited her to the veranda. Then Grigory Semyonovich joined them with a small aluminum flask. 5 drops for the joints. And so it went. Almost every evening they gathered on someone's veranda or in the gazebo, drinking tea from old enamel mugs, feasting on pies, jam, and fresh cucumbers with salt and dill. Grigory Semyonovich told stories about the war, about the post-war years, about how he and Nina met in their youth. Veronika Yuryevna listened, sometimes sharing her memories of Ivan, and felt better. Sometimes their grandchildren would visit, 2 boys and a girl, all boisterous, sunburned with skinned knees. They would run around Veronika Yuryevna's plot, climb the old apple tree and shout, "Granny, can I have some more cucumbers?" She would hand them a bowl of freshly picked, pimply cucumbers sprinkled with coarse salt, and watch them crunch them, laugh, and push each other. And not once did she feel a twinge of jealousy toward other people's children. Only a quiet, warm gratitude for the sound of children's voices, children's laughter, the bustle of children's lives nearby. In September, she harvested the crop. Buckets of red tomatoes, baskets of zucchini, bunches of onions and garlic. She took some to Maria, simply leaving it by the door in a large box with a note. "I grew everything myself. Enjoy yourselves." Her daughter called and thanked her, but her voice was laced with bewilderment. Veronika Yuryevna merely smiled into the phone. One day, at the end of October, when the leaves had almost fallen, she went to see a lawyer again, a different one. Not a young and lively one, but an older one, with tired eyes and leisurely movements. She brought all the documents and told them everything without reserve, about the box in the closet, the forged signature, and the lawsuit that was never filed. The lawyer listened silently. Then he asked, "Do you want to sue? Fraud and forgery are serious matters." Veronika Yuryevna shook her head. "No, I don't want to imprison my daughter, and I don't want Vanya to grow up without a mother. I want one thing, for them to understand that I'm not a thing." She drew up a new will, a very simple one. The dacha was transferred to her grandson, Ivan, and the remaining property, the apartment and savings, was divided equally between him and a charitable foundation that helps lonely elderly people and orphans. She had chosen the foundation herself, spent several months researching it, reading reviews, studying reports, and even visiting the foundation once to speak with the director. She liked the way they ran it, quietly, honestly, and without show. Maria and Sergei were mentioned only in the clause regarding the right to use the dacha for life, and only as Vanya's legal representatives. "This is their chance," she quietly told the lawyer. "If they want to be my family, they will. If not, then it's not necessary." She signed the papers with a firm hand. Returning home, Veronika Yuryevna sat by the window for a long time. The first snow was falling outside. Large flakes fell slowly and melted on the warm glass. She remembered that little gypsy girl with black eyes. Strange. She didn't even try to look for her, didn't thank her, didn't get angry. She just sometimes thought, "Thank you, girl. You gave me time and the truth." That evening, Vanya called. He had already dialed the number himself. He had learned how to do this year. "Grandma, can I come visit you for the New Year's holidays? For a long time. Mom said, if you don't mind." Veronika Yuryevna smiled so widely that even her cheeks hurt. "Of course, sunshine. Come. We'll decorate the Christmas tree, bake pies, make snowmen, and I'll tell you how your grandfather planted apple trees. He used to say, 'The main thing is to plant a tree that will outlive you. Then you won't disappear completely.'" Vanya laughed into the phone. "And we will plant a new one. Definitely," she answered. "Definitely we will." She hung up and looked at her hands, work-worn with new calluses and old wrinkles. Then she glanced at the room, the old sideboard, the photographs on the wall, the knitted blanket on the chair. Everything remained the same, and yet it had become her own. Veronika Yuryevna stood, walked to the window, and pressed her forehead to the cold glass. The snow fell and fell. She stood there and thought that life, it turns out, doesn't end when you're over 70. It simply changes the rules. And if you agree to play a new game, it suddenly becomes surprisingly honest and surprisingly familiar.